Hey, I find myself a little tired, so I apologize if this is a kind of a down, low energy video. I like to bring a little bit of energy to things, but I've got some coffee to hopefully help fix that. So this is Romans. Now, Paul has dealt with he's dealt with the law, right? And he said there's been a special law given to the Jews, and that special law has been written on the hearts of the Gentiles as well because they do things that the law requires. He said that in a theoretical way, but he showed and demonstrated that they actually do have a law unto themselves, and this shows that God is going to hold them accountable. This left Judaism in a position, and it appeared anyway to Paul's critics, that this left Judaism futile. And Paul wanted to show them that that simply wasn't the case. And so he says, you were left with the oracles of God, which is an incredible honor. But not only that, what we learn now is that it was essential. It was essential because by holding to the oracles of God, being held accountable to those oracles as well, God would use the Jews, would go through the Jews to bring salvation to the world. And if you care about other people, like God does, if you have a God's perspective on things, then that should matter to you. Did it matter to them? Probably not. How do I know that? Read the New Testament. Read how Jesus has to deal with people and their prejudices. What's the parable of the Good Samaritan? Good Samaritan? What's he talking about? It's a Samaritan. So you do see that how impressed and how impressed Paul is, and how Paul sees God's perspective by constantly talking about God's impartiality. This is critically important, not only to Paul, but his writings, that he wants to impress upon everyone how important it is to understand God's impartiality. This shows that he's the God of all. He would ultimately be impartial. This would be troubling, okay? No doubt about it, to some Jews at this time. It's not to us, right? I mean, it's really not. And so I have a hard time with my congregation trying to get them to feel this. They understand it intellectually, but can they feel it? Do they see the importance of it? Because look, we still deal with segregation now, right? I mean, you have differences in churches based along racial lines. Um, we just still are inundated with sin. I don't want to get into all that right now, but it is still relevant today. No question about it. So, a lot of people, when they get to Romans, by the way, I'll make a quick note. Sometimes we get past the hermeneutics and go straight into the fascinating theology. I love the theology just as much as anyone else. But for my purposes here, I'm more interested in trying to tap into what Paul is focusing on. And it's a dangerous game to get into why Paul's focusing on it, because reading an author's thoughts is near impossible. But Paul's wearing his heart on his sleeve in many cases here. Okay, so let's get on with this. Now, so there's an ebb and flow here, right? There's the Gentiles sin. The Jews have sinned. The Jews cannot claim that they're better than the Gentiles. But don't worry, because that doesn't mean that the work of God within the Jews was futile. In fact, it was completely essential to bring about God's impartiality. And then Paul's going to swing back again, and he's going to say this. This is chapter 3, verse 9. What then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin, as it is written. So he's going to go to prophecy. Now, I spoke in my church about prophetic utterances and just said, look, there are many elements to prophecy beyond predictive. right? In fact, much prediction in prophecy, and I don't have any examples of this, I should have looked that up. Much prediction in prophecy is interpretation of the future, right? Not necessarily just prediction. We're interested in the prediction for good reason. It's interesting and, encouraging sometimes. But interpreting the future is very important. But what about interpreting the present? Now here, this is interesting. This is a prophetic utterance of the contemporaries. Okay? Now, what's that say? He was speaking to his contemporaries about an interpretation of the day that found fulfillment in the future that Paul's going to use to substantiate his point further. Okay? So here's the prophecy. None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery. In the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that, now this is Paul, okay? Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. So, all right, so he's saying, look, here is the specified purpose of the law. It shows no one is right before God. There you go. He's being very specific, but now it gets really good. 21. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Now that partial sentence there is like a okay, yeah, I got where you're going here, Paul. You're saying the law didn't save, but God's righteousness is revealed apart from the law. But wait a minute. The law reveals God's righteousness, right? Listen to this after the comma. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. So it's a partial revelation of God's righteousness. Fascinating. When I was in grade school, I remember, I may have even mentioned this before on this series of videos, that in science class, I wasn't worth a nickel until we got to astronomy. And then it was easy. The mysteries of the universe have always been so fascinating to me. And I've probably not forgotten a thing I learned in any of those astronomy courses. And I remember one that was really interesting. It was at Westport Middle School. And the teacher said, at the time, Pluto was considered a planet, officially. And the teacher said, we had learned the planets, you had to memorize them. And one day the teacher dropped a bomb on us. She said, we've never seen Pluto. And we were like, what do you mean we've never seen Pluto? And she's like, yeah, we're still trying to observe it. And we're like, okay. And she said, so how do we know it's there? And we were like, I don't know. And she said, the way Neptune behaves. The way Neptune behaves in its orbit, it does something kind of funny with its gravity in its orbit that indicates there's a planet beyond it we can't see. And in fact, just as an interesting side note, at some point Neptune becomes the 9th planet and Pluto becomes the 8th planet. They switch. I was like, that's a mind-blowing when you're a kid, you know. And then I don't remember exactly whether she said Pluto. No, she must have said Neptune. That Neptune, when it goes beyond Pluto's orbit, Pluto's a very small planet. That's why you could observe Neptune and not Pluto, I guess. Neptune begins acting odd further. So she said this might indicate a 10th planet. Now, the question we should have asked was, well, if we declared Pluto a planet, why not this other planet? Maybe because there wasn't enough. It's such a rare event in human history that We're talking about the outer edges of the solar system. So, okay. But anyway, these are hints, right? These are so the law and the prophets were giving great hints as to God's righteousness. But now let's read this. But now the righteousness of God has been manifested, right? It can be seen apart from the law. You don't even need the law apart from the law, right? Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. Now, this is consistent with Paul's teaching because you have, and we learned this in Galatians, you have the law, right? Put that over here. Bunk. And then you have walking in the Spirit over here. There is no law against these things. So apart from the law, God's righteousness has been revealed. That's consistent with John 1. John 1, Jesus comes with something greater than what Moses came with. What did Moses come with? He came with the law, but Jesus was before Moses. And what does Jesus come with? Grace and mercy, right? Something that reveals something about God that the law can't do. The law is only hinting at it. Fascinating stuff. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction. See, so don't forget, he keeps including distinction as part of this grand revelation. That the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians, in this case the Greek Christians, really need to cohere. Critically important. This coherence is very important to Paul because that's what the church is. And that's what heaven's going to be. So don't forget that. He's really punching that in here. So, and then we get to the famous, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to reveal God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he had passed over former sins. It was to show his righteousness at the present time, so that he might be justified and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. When you go to Deuteronomy, you get to the very, very end where I'm doing my quiet times right now. My enhanced quiet. They're so enhanced, I don't even wear the Malarian robes, the +2 robes of discernment. That's how enhanced this quiet time is. Totally zany. And there's a fascinating passage. If you get down to the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 31, before it, and I've talked to this about how if you read all of Deuteronomy, you'll see God casts judgment on Israel too. He warns them. You go into the land and do the same things these people did, you're going to be judged too. But God tells Moses, they are going to fail. We know that now, but he says they are going to fail. And he says, I want you to write a song. And when things get at their absolute worst, even the children will have this song so that they can what? Be the remnant that God has called them to be. What is that act? It's an act of mercy and grace. It's an act of passing over sin. It's all over the Old Testament. But don't worry, the God of the Old Testament's not the God of the New Testament. He's so vindictive and evil. Or it could be those people are so ignorant. Anyway, you get the point here, okay? Paul is really doing a masterful job driving home this idea that to seek after righteousness, one must seek after Jesus.